And now it's my honor to introduce to you our next keynote speaker, Mark Whitaker. The executive of a Fortune 500 company, Mark was living the American dream. He had a 7-figure salary with stock options, a huge mansion, private schools, luxury cars, and access to a corporate jet. But when his wife confronted him on his intense work stress and unhappiness, he confessed the illegal activity of his company. Mark is here today to tell the story of his company's failings, how he had to go to jail for it, and how God transformed his life while he was in jail. Please join me in welcoming Mark Whitaker to the annual breakfast in conversation with Skip Vaccarello.
All I could think about was using this Ivy League PhD to move up the corporate ladder and become a CEO of one of the largest companies of the world. And I lived in a mansion with an 8-car garage, and I filled that 8-car garage with 8 cars, and a Ferrari, 2 BMWs, 2 Mercedes.
Talking 4 hours to the FBI. My wife said, good, check, like my lawyer. She said, my husband did the right thing. We can go home now, right? The FBI said, your husband just confessed to $1 billion a year crime. I have to either arrest him today or he has to become an informant tomorrow. And that's how I became an FBI informant.
So I basically stole my own golden parachute, wrote 5 checks for $90 million, and I went to prison for that fraud. And I had full immunity before that.
There's something you're not telling us.
Why would I hide anything from you guys?
We're going to find out what's going on, Mark.
Mark, thank you very much. Welcome. Thank you for being here as our guest on Connect Silicon Valley at our annual breakfast.
Yeah,
appreciate you being here. Absolutely. Now, Mark, that was quite a video that we just watched. It kind of gave the essence of your story at ADM, and what I'd like to do today is hear a little bit more. You can fill out some of the details on the ADM story that led you to go to prison, but I also want to focus, and probably mainly focus, on your spiritual journey. So if you're ready, let's begin. So Mark, tell me a little bit more about what your life was like, what it was like when you joined ADM.
I tell you, I was 32 years old at that time. It was 30 years ago, and it was a large, huge corporation, Archer Daniels Midland, number 56 on the Fortune 500, $70 billion in revenue, 30,000 employees, and here I am, age 32, divisional president of one of the fastest growing divisions and corporate vice president of the company. We had a 75-year-old CEO, Skip. We had a 69-year-old president. There were 3 executives above me. I was number 4 ranked executive, and I was 32 years old and half their age. So boy, I thought at that time in my life, if there's a heaven, this is it.
Amazing. So tell me a little bit about, so what was your lifestyle at that point like, Mark?
All my lifestyle with stock options and bonuses was well in the 7 figures. It was 6-figure base salary, but most of our income was in stock options and bonuses each year. I had that position for almost 7 years. And the 7 top executives each got access to the 7 corporate jets, Falcon 50s, and with being number 4 ranked executive, I had a jet. I bought the CEO's home. He was 75 years old, wanted to move to something smaller, so I had this home with 13,000 square feet, horse riding stables where your kids could ride horses, and an inside arena, 8-car garage, and being 32 and being full of myself, I thought I was Bon Jovi, and being 32 and full of myself, I filled that 8-car garage with 8 cars and Ferraris, Mercedes, BMWs. I mean, from the world perspective, they would say this is a guy with 32 years old that has it all, from the world perspective.
Yeah, Mark, I think you're right. Everybody would say, well, this guy has really made it at 32 to have all that. So tell us what happened at ADM, that kind of led to this issue. I know that you ended up stealing some money, and kind of give us some more of that story.
Yeah, basically what happened was, once I was there a couple years at the company, and they trust me and they saw me as family. So by this point, I'd be almost 34 years old, totally immersed into the company, doing well. really being groomed to take the place of the COO and president. So I would have went from number 4 ranked executive to number 2 executive, and there was a succession plan in place. But once they trusted me as family, they started bringing me into an international cartel that was involved, that they were basically working with their competitors, fixing the prices of food ingredients that lots of the attendees here today would be consuming. I mean, ingredients that are in like breakfast cereals and orange juices and Coca-Cola, and they basically one of the largest food additive companies in the world is probably the best way to explain it. Things like lactic acid and citric acid that you find in Pillsbury and Kraft. So we were fixing the prices of those ingredients. The fact that they were heading towards 80 years of age, they started grooming me to take over that international cartel. And really, to sum it up, Skip, we were really stealing from every consumer that went through the grocery store because of this price fixing scheme and earning hundreds of millions of dollars extra profit every year.
So that was the culture at ADM. Did you have any qualms about being involved in all that?
Well, I was there a couple years before they started really bringing me into that. And once they brought me into it, it was right after they gave me a huge bonus, a huge another set of stock. And about an hour later is when they shared with me that they were going to sign a mentor to start showing me how ADM does business. This would have been about April 1992 at that point. And I tell you, Skip, I was so obsessed with that compensation and so obsessed with keeping that position no matter what I had to do. And I started rationalizing. I thought, well, here these guys are in their 70s, been doing this for 30 years. Here I'm a young guy, 10 years past getting my PhD at Cornell in biochemistry. And I started thinking, well, they know a lot more about business than I do. This must be the way business is done. And I just started rationalizing. So I kind of took the fact that it was illegal and the fact it was a fraud out of it. And I said, well, this is just the way normal business is done. Because no one wants to look in the mirror and feel like a criminal. So you start rationalizing and take the criminal element out of it, is what I did.
Well, so that was really quite the culture. So tell me what happened. What turned that around where you became a whistleblower? So how did that all happen?
Well, once I was 7 months into the price fixing scheme, being mentored how to manage the cartel and how to fix prices of these food additives and feed additives. Once I was 7 months into it, my wife Ginger, who I'd met when we were in junior high, when we first met, in 7th grade and 8th grade, and then in high school we started going to the proms together and high school dances together and so on. So we were high school sweethearts. And so she's known me since I was in my teens, and she noticed a difference those last 7 months with the company when I was engaged with this price fixing scheme. And it was November 5th, 1992, and she challenged me. She said, Mark, something's changed these last 7 months. Let's talk about what's going on. And I said, well, I'm definitely under some pressure. I'm being mentored and trained how to manage this large international cartel where we earn hundreds of millions of dollars, close to $1 billion a year in extra profit. And I started sharing it with her. And she said, well, tell me about that. What does that mean, price fixing, international cartel? And I said, well, it's where we fix the prices of ingredients that go into processed foods and beverages in grocery stores around the world. And so consumers, when they go to the grocery store, they're paying for that price fix, that price gouging. They're paying that. Because let's say if Pillsbury pays a little extra for their ingredients to make a product, well, they have their profit margin built in, so it's going to get passed to the consumers. So the consumers are paying that. And I'll never forget her asking, she said, you mean my grandma on $200 a week, Social Security, and her grocery bill is her biggest bill, she's paying for this? And we live in a mansion with an 8-car garage. She said, Mark, I don't know if I can live with this. It sounds like outright theft to me. And then she said, Mark, is it illegal? And I said, well, it's illegal. It's breaking antitrust laws, but I'm told that everybody does it, and you cannot be in the commodity business without doing it. And that's when she told me she was going to go up in her study and pray about it, and I knew then I was in trouble.
Wow, so she was the one that really convicted you that this was not right. So after she prayed, what happened then, Mark?
Well, a couple hours later, she came back and she said she prayed about it, and she said God led her to a decision. And she said God led her to a decision to turn me into the authorities, that I have to turn myself into the FBI for breaking antitrust laws. And she said God led her that it's a perfect time to turn myself in because I'm involved with something for 7 months that's been going on for 12 years. Even 9 years even before I joined the company. So she said, Mark, this is a perfect time to expose this fraud and to come clean and to expose this massive fraud that's going on, ripping off consumers around the world. And I said, Ginger, I could go to prison for breaking antitrust laws. I said, the CEO is best friends with President Clinton. He picks up the phone and talks to President Clinton on a regular basis. I said, this is a billionaire, a powerful company, number 56 on the Fortune 500. They will destroy us. I'm more afraid of them than the government. And that's when she said, you know what, Mark, my CEO is bigger than your CEO. And I said, Ginger, who is your CEO? And she said, my CEO is Jesus. And he's bigger than your CEO. And you're turning in yourself today. We've already set some things in motion, and it's going to happen today.
Wow, so your wife Ginger is the one that kind of convicted you to turn yourself in to the FBI. That's really quite
She's the true
quite a story.
whistleblower. She's really the whistleblower.
Well, let's take just a little segue for a moment. So Ginger sounds like she had a deep faith and she was really convicted you. Then I want to follow up in that story with what happened with the FBI. But tell me a little bit about what was your spiritual background at that point. I mean, did you go to church? Did you consider yourself a Christian? Or
Well, how
did all that work?
My parents were Christians, and I grew up as a Christian, and they forced me to go to church. But, you know, being a science major, I went to Ohio State University for a bachelor's and master's in science and a PhD in biochemistry from Cornell in New York. And I even had professors during that time said, if you're going to be a PhD scientist, you can't believe in God. If you believe in God, you can't be in my class, because it was Darwinism and evolution and Big Bang Theory. So I had 8 years of college education that convinced me that there was no God. And so I started thinking, well, my parents believe in God because they didn't go to college. But if they were educated like me, they wouldn't believe in God. That's what I really felt at that stage. So I went to church because my parents forced me to. And then I went to church when I was married and our kids with Ginger. She became a Christian 10 years before me. So I was going to church during that period of time. But Skip, it was one ear and out the other. I was not listening. I was thinking of the next big deal and the next big bonus I was going to be getting, even when in church.
So there were two different worlds. You were at church, probably enjoyed it. You know, you were supporting Ginger and the sort of legacy of your parents, but you didn't believe it, and you just kind of was business as usual for you.
Yes, through the motions.
So tell me then what happened. So Ginger says, Mark, we have to turn you into the FBI. So this is just amazing to me. So what happened? How did that all take place? What did the FBI had to say when you approached them?
We set that first day that I shared with Ginger, 4 hours with the FBI. We were young and naive, no attorneys, just her and I sitting with the FBI, and I started sharing about the price fixing case. And what I wouldn't share, like the FBI would say, now tell me a little bit about this case. And I said, it's really not that big. It's not really that much to talk about. And Ginger would say, well, he told me it was $1 billion theft. And then he said, $1 billion theft. And he said, tell me how long that was going on. I said, it really wasn't going on that long. You got a lot more important things to do at the FBI. And Ginger said, he told me it was going on for 12 years. So he should have just interviewed Ginger and left me out of it. I was doing everything I could to backpedal to get out of that. But after 4 hours, he knew it all. He was updated what I've exposed to for the last 7 months. And I had a choice to either be arrested that day on November 5th, 1992, to be arrested or to start wearing a wire. And I just, at that stage, I thought wearing a wire and being an informant would be the way to go. And I met the FBI agents at 6 o'clock the next morning. They shaved my chest, put microphones on my chest, had a tape recorder in a briefcase, another one in a notebook, another one on my back with an athletic band, 3 different tape recorders. And I wore a wire, Skip, I wore a wire every day for 3 years.
Wow, that was what was that experience like? I mean, wearing a wire, so you're going into the office, and these are your friends, your colleagues, and you know you're gathering evidence to turn them in. It must have been pretty stressful. And for 3 years you did this?
Yeah, 3 years, 1992 to 1995, the most stressful period of my life. I lost 60 pounds. People at work thought I had cancer. I mean, I was falling apart. The FBI, when they wired me up, they say, Mark, if these guys catch you, they're going to kill you. This is serious stuff. And I knew at some point I was going to have to go to a federal trial as a witness against them, and against a couple of them billionaires and powerful men, and as I mentioned, knew even U.S. presidents. And I just thought I could never survive it, and I was falling apart during that time. By far the most stressful period in my life, and I couldn't tell anybody about it.
Wow, and I understand that you would wear this wire. I saw the movie, The Informant, and it looked like you visited. You got together internationally with some of these folks that you were doing, or not, you were doing the price fixing with, and you were wearing the wire in those meetings as well?
Yes, all of these meetings I was wearing a wire, and the FBI would put a green lamp. I would tell them where the room was going to be, and they would get a green lamp. And this green lamp looks like it came from a yard sale. And this green lamp would be at the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore, it'd be at the Mandarin Hotel a few weeks later in Hong Kong. This green lamp was at 2 or 3 meetings a month from in front of all the cartel members for 3 years, and they never noticed, and it was 5 feet from them.
That's funny. So I never noticed that the same green lamp was in each one of these meetings, huh?
Yeah, same green lamp, no matter what room and what country.
So for 3 years, and there must have been lots and lots of evidence. So mentally, it sounds like you were really stressed. You said you lost 60 pounds, and so tell me a little bit more. What happened as a result? So you were about. I mean, at some point, the FBI probably had enough evidence. And what were you thinking at the time? What about your own career?
Well, for a while, the first couple years I was wearing a wire, I thought I could survive it and still become that COO that was planned as part of the succession plan, and maybe even become the CEO, because the person they were grooming to be the CEO, he was going to be going to prison for price fixing also. So I thought, I could maybe survive this and still continue my career and be either that number 1 or number 2 slot at Archer Daniels Midland. But about the last year, I mean, Ginger really explained to me and convinced me. She said, Mark, when this is all over with, these board members are close friends with the CEO for 30 years. You're not going to be able to stay there. You need to be thinking of where you're going to go. And I started thinking, Skip, I started asking myself, well, who's going to hire somebody that wore a wire for 3 years? I started thinking to myself, it'd be easier to get a job as a felon than someone wore a wire for 3 years against their own company. I thought, well, and here at that point, I'm only in my mid-30s. I thought I'm never going to be able to be employed again, especially a job like this. So I thought, well, I'm going to get let go, terminated, before I can even exercise my stock options. So I thought, well, gosh, I'm the smartest guy in this room. I mean, I was all about myself. This is an example of selfish leadership. And I thought, well, I'm no way going to walk away from that, what's owed to me, before I'm terminated. So I went in and wrote 5 checks to myself for what the stock options would have been worth if I could exercise them at a later date. So I basically stole my own stock option a year and a half early, my own severance, wrote 5 checks for $9.5 million, and I had full immunity prior to that point, never to be charged, never go to prison, full immunity until I wrote that $9.5 million to myself, till I stole that. The case went public. They sent 70 FBI agents and took computers and paperwork, all the things that would justify and really support what was on the tapes, the audio tapes and videotapes, to get some physical evidence. And so they did a raid, and quickly ADM learned that I was the one wearing the wire, and I was the one that gathering the evidence. They learned that very quickly, literally the day of the raid. And so at that point, they kind of turned that cannon around. That $9.5 million, when I'm part of the team, it was okay. But once they learned that I was an enemy, they immediately called the FBI and said, he's no white knight informant. He stole $9.5 million from us the same time that he's working for the FBI.
So what happened with that? So it sounds like they raided it. A number of people, I believe, then went to prison.
Yes,
and
they all did.
And
yes.
I'm assuming that you weren't, you probably had to give the money back, or what happened after that?
Well, here's what the FBI did. They were so sympathetic. They said, they told the prosecutors, there's nobody in their right mind that would write $9.5 million the same time they're working for the FBI. They said, we took Mark, this is the FBI agents talking to the prosecutors, said we should have never made him wear a wire for 3 years. He was losing weight, he wasn't sleeping, he was falling apart, he was having a nervous breakdown, and we kept forcing him. So for that reason, the prosecutors listened to the FBI's arguments and they said, you're right. We should have never had him wear a wire that long. They don't allow an informant to wear a wire longer than a year now, partly based on what happened in my case by wearing one for 3 years. So they gave me a 6-month plea agreement. They said, we got to punish him some, but we'll really minimize it. It was going to be a white-collar camp for 6 months. I mean, it was a deal of a lifetime for a $9.5 million fraud. The others were going to go to prison for several years. I was going to go for 6 months for that $9.5 million fraud. And I took that plea agreement, and Ginger, asked me to sign it, and let's put it behind us. And I looked at Ginger and I said, Ginger, you're the reason why I'm in this mess in the first place. I'm going to do the opposite you want me to do. And I ripped up that 6-month plea agreement, fired my attorney who recommended it, and hired other attorneys and went out and fought that case through the courts over 3 years and got an 8.5-year sentence instead. And I would have had 6 months.
Tell me what was like. I mean, you certainly were living an enviable lifestyle. Prison was not that.
Well, I went to a white collar camps, nonviolent, where there would be attorneys there, pharmacists. They were all paper crimes, nonviolent crimes. So there was no razor wire or anything like that. But you can't leave. It's still a prison camp, and you may have 7 or 8 acres at that particular location, but you can't. If you leave, you're a fugitive. You live in a dorm instead of in a prison cell, but you're still there. You're $20 a month for 8.5 years. It's a long time. It was from age 40 to age 49 for me, Skip. So it's a long time. It wasn't as stressful as wearing a wire, but it's still, you're out of the market, you're away from your family. I'd see my family on weekends during visiting, but it's a visiting room with a guard in the corner. It's not freedom. I mean, you're incarcerated.
So I understand that while you were in prison, you had sort of a transforming experience. A couple of people you ended up meeting. Tell me and the audience a little bit about how that all happened.
Well,
up to that point, you were saying Christianity, you really didn't believe it, but I think that changed when you were in prison, didn't it?
It did. Shortly before I went to prison, someone reached out to me, a guy named Ian Howes, a CFO of a pharmaceutical company. He was part of a group called CBMC, Christian Businessmen Connection, and he discipled guys, introduced them to Jesus. And he read about me in the newspaper, and he reached out to me. And he said, Mark, prison is going to be the beginning of your life, and you're going to find your true purpose in life with the journey you're ready to start. And this was just a few months before I went to prison. This was right after I tried to take my own life. I mean, I saw life as over. I tried to kill myself. I could not imagine going to prison for 8.5 years. He read about that suicide attempt and reached out to me, someone I don't even know, and reached out to me and introduced me to Jesus. But I still had that science block. He gave me some hope, Skip, but I still had that science block during that time. And then my second week in prison, a man named Chuck Colson, who went to prison years earlier for Watergate. He was the White House counsel under President Nixon, who went to prison for some of the Watergate scandals and became a Christian during that time. He reached out to me my second week in prison. I started sharing with him about what I was learning from Ian Howes. He said, Mark, have you surrendered your life to Jesus yet? Have you given your life to God? And I said, Chuck, I want to, but my science is a block. 8 years of college tell me if you believe in God, you can't be a scientist. From one of the best science schools, Cornell, Ivy League school in biochemistry. I said, I just can't erase all that. And he started burying me with article after article and book after book of PhD scientists that believed in God and why. Stuff I've never seen during my 8 years in college. And reading all that evidence, after a few months of that with Chuck Colson, what I was reading, I surrendered my life on June 4th, 1998, and surrendered my life to Jesus for the first time, even though I went to church most of my life.
So how did your life change after that, Mark? That's really quite a story. So
Boy,
what happened?
Dramatically.
You were in prison then. You said that started only a couple of weeks in. It sounds like it took a little while for you, and then you prayed to accept Jesus. So what happened after that? How did your life change?
Yeah, I was about 10 months being discipled by Ian Howes at that point, and about 3 months by Chuck Colson. 10 months hearing about God, learning about God, and reading about God. But then, like I said, when I read about the scientists, and I tell you how my life changed on June 4th. I've still had 8 years of prison yet to go. I'm only 3 or 4 months into it. So I had 8 years yet to go, and $20 a month for another 8 years. But I tell you, God started saying, Mark, use this time productively in prison. There's so many things you can do It's not about what your income is. There's so many ways to serve when you're in prison. And I started help with in the education department, helping inmates get their GEDs, learn how to read, learn how to write. Some of them I helped them get 2-year degrees. For the first time in my life, I was helping someone else besides myself for the first time in my life, and that was in prison. In reality, I became a free man in prison, in reality.
A free man, in prison. And it's always interesting to me that a lot of people, kind of look at faith and they think that you're sort of, there are these rules and regulations and freedom is the last thing that you have. But it sounds like when you came to faith, you really felt a different sort of freedom. Can you explain that a little bit more?
I did. On that June 4th, 98, tried to take my own life a few months before I even went to prison. I felt such a peace and contentment that I'm going to take this burden that's way too big for me to handle, 8 more years of prison, and put it on God's shoulders. And I tell you, God forgave me. He pardoned me that day. And he said, Mark, we're going to put you on a different track. We're going to put you on the right track, and we're going to turn your life around if I let him guide my life and not me guide my own life, because I wasn't doing too well at it. And I turned the steering wheel over to him, and I'm telling you, each morning I couldn't wait to get up to see what God had in store. And most people lose their families when they're in prison. Ginger and the kids came every weekend for 8.5 years. They even moved to 3 different states. As I would, with good behavior, get to a better place in a different state, they would move to that state. God, with the divorce rates well in the 90% range for those that are incarcerated 5 years and longer, I'm married 41 years this year. It's a miracle of God, how God kept our family together and how we even got closer and stronger in prison.
Wow, in prison. And do I understand that you ended up mentoring a lot of people when you were in prison?
I did. I used that same Operation Timmy. It's a tool to introduce others in a non-threatening way to God and introduce to Jesus. And I ended up taking 61 guys. It's about a 1.5-year program.
Wow.
61 guys through that in prison. Some of the most rewarding years in my life were those were not 9 lost years. Those were productive years in my life.
At some point you were free, and what did the FBI think of you?
Well, the FBI, during my first year, they started thinking, we made this guy wear a wire for 3 years. No one in their right mind would throw away a 6-month plea agreement if he was thinking in his right mind. Mark was not in his right mind after all what he did, what all I helped with the FBI in that case. So they started visiting me in prison, and they started becoming big supporters of mine even while I was in prison. And then I was released over 14 years ago, and Cornell University started introducing, some of those professors became Christians. Some of those scientists became Christians. And they started introducing me to other biotech executives and pharmaceutical executives, and they had a job lined up for me the day I got out of prison in 2006, the day I got out. And I eventually became the COO of that organization, and still on that advisory board even today. The FBI forgave me. Society started forgiving me. God touched the heart of Ginger, my wife, and our children, and they forgave me. God redeemed me first, and then he touched the hearts of others to forgive me. Today, the FBI agents are so supportive. The 4 agents, a federal judge, and my prosecutor on the case are trying to get me a full presidential pardon. They've all written on my behalf.
Mark, I think you also have a video that we can show where there's an interview with, I think is it Ian Paisley that was the FBI agent on the account?
He was the actual supervisor of the whole case.
He was the supervisor, and then he talks a little bit about that. So let's play that video now.
He served almost 9 years in federal prison.
The thing is, he never got any credit for what he did for the U.S. government and the FBI for 3 years. That was overshadowed by his other conviction.
Dean Paisley is a retired FBI agent who supervised the Archer Daniels price-fixing case. He calls Whitaker a national hero.
I don't think people realize really truly what Mark did for the government and the people on that.
Paisley claims if Whitaker hadn't stepped forward when he did, ADM may still be fixing prices to this day, driving up costs on everything from chicken to Coca-Cola.
If you look at what he did, stealing from ADM $9 million, that was minuscule compared to the $1 billion plus that ADM stole from you and I.
Paisley and at least 2 other agents who worked on the case are now working to get Whitaker a presidential pardon.
To me, their support is worth more than a pardon itself.
Mark, that was quite a video and a testimony from the FBI. Do you have any final comments?
I tell you what, when I think about when I tried to take my own life, almost 30 years ago, I was hopeless. I was hopeless, and what God did, and even me in Howes, when he planted that seed, it started giving me some hope. But when I surrendered my life to Jesus in 1998, I had lots of hope, even with 8 years of prison left to go. It gave me hope that I can use that time in prison productively, and that there will still be a season in life even after I got out of prison. And I can tell you that's all been 22 years ago now when I surrendered my life to Jesus. And I look at how much more fulfilling life is after prison and after God in my life, especially, well before when the world thought I had it all with the mansion and the corporate jet and all the cars.
Wow, so you really found a reason for hope, and you found it in prison of all places, and it's really affected your life since then. Well,
yeah,
Mark,
I was able to join a group, Coca-Cola Consolidated, called T-Factor, and I head that up. It's where we equip executives how to integrate faith in your work and how that would change your culture. I mean, who would have thought? I mean, God, one of the companies I stole from 30 years ago on the price fixing, I'm working for today, another miracle of God, as the head of the T-Factor initiative, where we equip leaders to integrate faith in their companies, where it will change their cultures and where it will advance the Great Commission. I mean, it's just amazing what God, the path he's put me on. Really a life from ashes to beauty.
Really is amazing. Now, Mark, I know that you have a special guest with you. You're at your home, and you've mentioned Ginger a few times. So if you can, I'd like to bring Ginger in. And I know that I have a few questions. I'm sure the audience has a few questions that they'd like to ask her as well. Hi, Ginger.
Hi, hello.
Welcome. That's quite a story. Turning your husband into the FBI, and it's really an amazing story. And he gives you the credit for your faithfulness and making that happen. But tell me, I'm just curious. So Mark was offered this 6-month plea bargain. He could have been out of prison in 6 months, and he didn't do it. What was your reaction to that?
Well, I have to say that when the lawyer came to us and said that there was this 6-month plea deal, I was beyond excited, because the 3 years undercover had been quite torturous, and I was just wanted to put this behind us. And when Mark then looked in my face and said he was tearing it up, I wanted to kill him. I really did want to kill him. There was nothing that I would not at that moment, because it had just been so hard, worrying every day that when he went to work, was he going to come home? Were they going to do something to him? Would somebody have found out that he had a wire? So I felt like we'd already paid our penance for the 3 years, and I just wanted it to be over at that time. But I understood his frustration too. He felt like he had really sacrificed for the FBI, putting his life on the line, and he felt that 6 months was too much in his mind for what had happened. But looking back now, I am thrilled that he tore it up. I really am, because
wow, that's quite a statement.
Well, now many years later, and I see the result, because if Mark had gone into prison just for 6 months, he would have came out the same person. He would have never spoken to Ian Howes. He would have never talked to Chuck Colson. He would not have listened, because he would have already on the first day been planning where he was going to go and what he was going to do and what big company he was going to work for. So even though 8.5 years was a long time, it was what God needed to do. He really had a purpose for Mark, and it took Mark really being separated from all the things that Mark thought was important, title and money and corporate jets and all those types of things.
Wow, amazing. Well, that's quite a testimony for you, because he was in prison then for 8 years and 8 months, and you stuck by him. I understand that doesn't usually happen with spouses of someone that goes to prison. So
no, it doesn't.
How did that happen?
Well, God is good. I mean, He is amazing. I have to say that. Unfortunately, the Bureau of Prison doesn't really make it easy for families to stay together. That's the hardest part because the families are really struggling. They're then becoming the sole breadwinner and taking care of children, and it's really tough on them. We were fortunate our kids were a little bit older, and God was just amazingly good. I was able to go back to school and get my degree and finish my degree in education and psychology, and every place Mark was moved, God opened up a teaching position for me in kindergarten, of all things, every year. So every time that he was moved, I got to have this amazing job in kindergarten, and always surrounded by Christian women. So it was like he knew I needed this support system, even though they didn't know our story. They were just strong Christian women, just being kind-hearted, and took me under their wing as a new teacher. And I was also blessed too. My sister's an amazing prayer warrior, and she was in North Carolina at that time, and she prayed and prayed and prayed for me, and their prayer warriors prayed for me, and they taught me a lot. They taught me so many things, and some of my favorite verses, like is in the James 1, where you're having to know that going through endurance in these trials produces endurance. So that's was one I said over and over, that there has to be a purpose for this. There's a purpose for all that we're going through, and putting on the armor every day. These were things, and that these women prayed for me every day when I was just too tired or overwhelmed and couldn't go on. I knew these women were out there praying for me, and so I'm extremely grateful for those prayer warriors that were out there, and the companies that Mark said. There were some companies that ADM had stolen from, and they came along and set up a trust fund for our children, which was mind-blowing, because that just doesn't happen in the real world. So God was providing for us, because I was a first-year teacher. I didn't make very much money, and so God just came along. He just provided everything along the way, and then when Mark got out, he just has laid an amazing path for him to walk on and to be used by God in every position that he's been in. So we are, even though it was a journey, it was for God's glory, and so that's how we're looking at it now.
Well, the two of you have really an incredible story, and thank you so much for sharing it with us and our audience at Connect Silicon Valley. And your story is one maybe people can't directly relate. I don't know how many people in our audience have stolen that much money, or kind of lived that dramatically different lifestyle, from living in this huge mansion and corporate jets to then going to prison, and then for you, Ginger, to stick with Mark during that whole process. But it also speaks to the faithfulness of God, and how God can redeem lives. Never gave up on you. As Mark, you rejected him, but it sounds like Ginger and everybody was praying for you, and it's just what an amazing turnaround that's really happened. So. What a great story of redemption and transformation, and thank you very much for sharing that story, and may God bless you. And now I'll turn it over to our MCs, to Anna and Dave.
What a story of redemption. I mean, one of the things that really stood out for me was that right after Mark tried to commit suicide, a complete stranger called him to encourage him and tell him about Jesus. I mean, what a miracle that was. That this stranger would give him a call because he read about him in the paper. And at the time, Mark still had science block, which means that he didn't believe in God. He still had doubts, but that call gave him so much hope, and it changed the course of his life. That really encouraged me to follow through when God put someone on my heart to encourage, even if I don't know them. Has God ever put a stranger on your heart to reach out to? And how would you do things differently after hearing Mark's story? Dave, what about you? How were you encouraged by Mark's story?
I think the statement, "a free man in jail," kind of sticks out for me. I love this phrase. Here was Mark, imprisoned by his ambitions and wealth, but he found freedom when he surrendered all that to God. He found forgiveness, it became real to him, and he forgave himself. I mean, even FBI agents came to visit him in jail. I mean, his Cornell professor accepted Christ as a result of his testimony. His family visited him every weekend while he was in jail for 8.5 years. After his time in jail, 3 companies offered him jobs. He became the head of T factor. God clearly provided. How is this possible? When we surrender, as Mark did, we're going to find freedom. How about you? Where do you need to find freedom? Where do you need to surrender?